Good morning, folks. Welcome to the Charleston View from the Penthouse interviews. My name is Jim O'Donnell. I'm university librarian at Arizona State University. It was my privilege at the Charleston Conference to introduce my very old friend, Joy Connolly, president of the American Council of Learned Societies, for her very well-received keynote address. We're meeting now in the somewhat more informal circumstances of this lovely penthouse on the top floor of the Francis Marion Hotel. The Hotel Francis Marion never changes, but the world around it changes. The view from that window used to include the monumental pillar with the life-size or larger than life-size statue of John C. Calhoun on top. Since we were last here, that statue has gone away. The world continues to change and evolve forward in a variety of ways. So that's kind of what we'll be talking about with Joy Connolly. Joy is president of the American Council of Learned Societies. I could do the full CV introduction and tell you about her degrees from Princeton and Penn. I could tell you that she used to teach at the University of Washington, at Stanford, at NYU, that she became a dean at NYU, then a provost, and for her sins, interim president at City University of New York Graduate Center before coming along to ACLS 3 years ago. But I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff. Instead, I'm going to ask Joy to set us up a little bit by telling us something of where she comes from, what her context is. She's a leading spokesperson for the humanities. No, I think it's fair to say, even of you, Joy, that no little girl growing up in a small town where the train whistle goes by at night ever dreams of becoming a leading spokesperson for the humanities. So the course had to go a little differently. Tell us something of how that comes about, of how you got to be in this place and what you think about.
Thank you, Jim. And it's great to be here. And I wish we lived in a world where little girls and little boys would wake up thinking, I want to become a leading spokesperson for the humanities. So in some ways, I feel like my work is trying to create a world where that's actually visible and imaginable for little kids around the country and around the world. But when I was a little kid, going back to my origins, I was spending my time in a small, then very rural suburb of Lowell, Massachusetts, a mill town where I was born, about an hour outside of Boston. I came from a Irish Catholic, French Canadian Catholic family. First, my parents were the first in their generation to go to college. They went to schools that are now part of the amazing success story, which is the University of Massachusetts system. They were, but the schools had different names then. They were Lowell Tech and Lowell Teachers College. So I came out of certainly what we've come to understand with more and more urgency and depth over the last 3, 5, 10 years is a very white story, a very white picture of a 20th century post-World War II, where success came with hard work and with access to more or less free public education. Now, as I said, we've begun to realize with more depth and urgency over the last few years how limited that story really is. It doesn't describe the experience of all Americans in the post-war period. But that was the frame in which I grew up, that if one worked hard, studied in school, kind of got ahead and set one's sights high, that one would be rewarded. And so part of my trajectory is very much of one of just amazing privilege that came with doors that did open up as I worked hard in school and kept my eyes open on the next stage. So I went to an extraordinary independent school in Concord, Massachusetts for high school, and then went on, as you said, to get degrees at Princeton and then at the University of Pennsylvania. So I think over the last few years, as I've looked at that trajectory and realized how extraordinarily lucky I have been at every stage, it's helped shape really my sense of what good I can try to do in the world, which is to make, if not that exact trajectory, because of just numbers of slots in schools, to make a world or help contribute to making a world where the experiences that kids have in school, K through 8, that students have in high school, and then as young adults and older adults in colleges and universities, where their access to smart teachers, books, uh, all matter of historical and cultural and artistic creative resources can open their minds and change the world. Because that's really, when I look back on my life, that and up to where I am now, that describes each step, very much an encounter that I feel, as I said, lucky to have had with smart people, and especially books that just open my eyes to new worlds and new ways of being. So.
Well, that's very funny. I didn't know parts of that story, and I'll see your mill town of Lowell and raise you Holyoke, which is where my father was born, but of an earlier generation. He never got to college. He was of a different era, but it is striking the extent to which in higher education, a lot of us benefited from the relative privilege of the working and middle class mid-century generation that got historic opportunity just out of all proportion to what human beings had ever had before. And you and I get to sit around nice places like this, comfortable and happy, and we hope productive, because of what those generations of our parents and grandparents managed.
Yeah, and there's no question that that the rising cost of a university education, both in the public and private sectors, is radically limiting people's not just people's access to college and to a university, but students' experience inside it. You know, I know I'm not alone in seeing a real change in students I encounter, and I'm thinking here particularly of undergraduates at all the range of schools I've worked at places like Stanford, at places like NYU, but also at the City University of New York, where anxieties about student debt and anxieties about employment are I would say deforming through no fault of the students. I'm not blaming them, but they're deforming their sense of what they might experiment with, what they might study, what they might major in, and that's something as a society we need to tackle as a crisis, as an emergency, because that's exactly what it is.
Well, so I'll speak to your city university. The college degree my father couldn't get was the one where he wanted to move to Queens and live in the basement of his aunt's house so he could get a job in New York and go to City College at night and get a degree. And his aunt was too timid, wouldn't let him do that. So he went to work in a factory instead. But that was, it was plausible at that point to get a job, some job, working class job, and work your way through City College and get at something. It's only not true now. So one more snapshot. What's an early defining moment for Joy Connolly in or of libraries? What's a snapshot? Where is young Joy brightening with a gleam in her eye in a library sometime?
Oh, my mind goes straight to I must have been 9 years old, so I'll just be honest and say it was 1979, and I was in the middle of reading J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. I had just finished the second volume, which fans of the series will know ends on with a cliffhanger. I was rushing on my bike because I lived in my town a bike ride away from the public library in the center of town. I was rushing in with the second volume, ready to run to the shelves to get the third, when a man walked out as I was walking in the door of the library with that third volume in his hand. And there was only one copy in the library, and I'll never forget it. The prospect of having to wait a week or two, and I now don't remember what the length of checkout time was at that moment, but the idea of waiting even just a minute for a book that I couldn't wait to start reading kind of scarred me for life and made me extremely excited when, as I got older and then into graduate school and the digital revolution happened, the idea of being able to access books, just on demand and get them on your computer screen, it began to heal that wound. But for me, the library, the public library in my town, which was staffed by very patient librarians who were very happy to direct eager kids who piled up, many stacks of books every week, to places all over the library. They weren't gatekeepers. They didn't see their job as telling kids, oh, you've got to stay in these, kid-oriented spaces. Don't go there. Don't go there. They were very keen on opening doors and encouraging kids to stretch themselves. So I did. I spent a lot of time reading in that library and read much more than fantasy and science fiction, but certainly, as I said at the beginning, part of that sense of world's opening did come from my many, many hours reading science fiction in the bowels of that library.
Well, so you probably don't remember what you checked out that day as a substitute for Tolkien. That would be interesting to know.
If I could go back in a time machine, I was just so traumatized by the experience. Sure. I wish I could remember.
Okay, well, run the clock forward. So that's who you are, where you come from, and now you're in a position where you give out millions of dollars a year. And reminds me of the late great Vartan Gregorian's comment when he shifted from academic administration to philanthropy, when he said, yes, it is truly more blessed to give than to receive, and more fun besides. But you give out millions of dollars a year. You coordinate work of learned societies representing the humanities and humanistic social sciences. And you're active yourself in some ways with work you've done before, but around issues that are important as an innovator in the space of humanities higher education. When you look around now, what do you think are the most important things we should be paying attention to? That's probably going to be the things you're paying attention to make a difference in a complex and contested world.
It's a great question, and I will try to not go on too long because the list is long, and that's a good thing. I mean, the good news with all the challenges and obstacles to access, inequality of resources. I mean, the list of challenges is long, but the good news is that there are dozens, hundreds, thousands of people around the country and around the world, not just thinking about these problems, but coming up with creative and effective solutions for them. So one of the most exciting things that really gets me up in the morning and keeps me energized through the day is remembering just how many people are out there working on the issues that I'll dive into now. But that's what keeps me optimistic and confident, in fact, that we will move forward into an age where more kids will have the experience of longing for a book and going into the library and actually managing to get hold of it, unlike me as a small kid. But let me start with what I think is the most pressing and complex issue that will take a generation to solve, but we will get there, and that is ensuring that humanistic disciplines, social science disciplines, interpretive social science disciplines open their doors to a variety of perspectives, to a diversity of views, to people of diverse backgrounds who want to speak to diverse audiences, and not only open the doors, but allow what happens behind the doors, if I can stick with that metaphor for a moment, to change the whole design of the fields of the disciplines themselves. That's why this is so complicated. I think for me, it is an absolute priority to ensure that, let's just take the example of a college or university humanities division, that each department, each discipline is welcoming into its undergraduate classrooms, its graduate seminars, its faculty ranks, that it's welcoming a diverse bunch of people who are creative, who are thinking outside the box, who come from demographically diverse backgrounds in terms of race and class and gender and the list that we now know well we need to have inform our disciplines. But then not just to open the doors and say, come on in, it's really interesting in here, but to take really seriously what happens when people who are not white, for example, come into a traditionally white-dominated discipline and say, we don't have to do things exactly the same way as you've always done them. Let's try to do something different. And in fact, if that changes the research focus or scholarly focus of a particular field, if it affects curriculum in a particular way, our challenge and opportunity to use the cliche is to embrace those changes, because the humanities and interpretive social sciences are about understanding human beings, and we need to remain human as a group, as we in all the fullness of the word human, if we want these disciplines and fields, to be sustained and to be the best that they can be, and reveal the most, produce the most new and accurate knowledge of the world in which we live, and to keep that knowledge circulating, and to keep people paying attention to it. So that is, I could say this is about diversity and equity and inclusion, and about faculty hiring of diverse people. But I want to emphasize the challenge is much more than that, and the opportunity is much more than that. It isn't just about having a diverse perspective, a range of perspectives in the humanities and social sciences as we know them. It's about embracing the change that welcoming will bring. The second is, and all of these are related because higher education is this big Rube Goldberg machine, and everything is interconnected in some way. But the second issue very much on my mind is the need for the academy to re-embrace debate and dialogue. And here, I really do not want to fall into the trap of talking about wokeness or other words that are now becoming increasingly hard to use because they serve as dog whistles or red flags to people. But I really do believe that we have work to do to change perceptions about what kinds of dialogues are welcome in the academy, in colleges and universities, and all the spaces connected to them. And I think we have work to do in our practice as well, in terms of welcoming and managing in a humane and reasonable way debates about issues that don't always invite humane behavior or reasonable behavior or rational understanding civil dialogue. I think as we look out at an increasingly polarized country, politically polarized, socially polarized, there aren't very many spaces that appear to me to be viable spaces to experiment with modeling productive, civil, but also lively and real debate and differences of opinion beyond the academy. It's awfully hard to do it on the pages of on the op-ed pages of a newspaper. It seems impossible to me to do it on Twitter or Facebook or other modes of social media. Maybe this will change, but right now it seems kind of past the point of no return on these avenues of social media. They stoke up too much emotion, and they become instruments of tribalism. So I look to the university and the college to be more courageous in leadership and in faculty taking responsibility for having conversations that will be difficult for some and not difficult for others, to be wary of the emotional burden and psychological weight that especially historically marginalized groups experience and feel when they're drawn into debates that are upsetting on issues that are upsetting to them, but to not allow our desire to comfort and support people who might be discomfited or deeply distressed or wounded by debate, to not allow that support to become to let us build a wall of insulation around people. So that's, I think, the second challenge. I'll mention two more if I can. I'll be a little bit briefer, maybe. The third is debate and dialogue of a different kind, and that's among scholars. I would love to see more experiments with the shape of departments and the organization of people by discipline, so that it's easier for faculty in colleges and universities both to talk with each other and engage with each other in research projects and in teaching and co-teaching. Universities make co-teaching so much more difficult than they should, but also to reach outside the university and bring in non-academics. And I hate describing them with a negative because, but I'm talking about such a large, diverse group. I think it would be so good for the academy and for the humanities and interpretive social sciences in particular to bring people who don't live their whole lives within the college and the university or the library into these spaces and see where they take us, because this is another example of bringing in diverse perspectives and then allowing what has passed for conventional traditional practice to change as a result. So I hope that we'll see, and at ACLS we are at the American Council of Learned Societies, we are engaged in a couple of convenings and workshops, long-term sustained efforts to accelerate faculty thinking about how they might reorganize themselves with a view to making humanistic disciplines more legible and more meaningful to students and to the public at large, and to engage the public at large. And the last thing I'll touch on that's on my mind is the way we recognize and reward intellectual production. And here, I'll give one example. We are very used to thinking about hiring people. When we look at young PhDs, not necessarily biologically young, but people fresh from PhD programs, we're used to looking at them with a real focus, at least in the liberal arts, in elite liberal arts colleges and in research universities. We're used to looking at them with an intense and almost exclusive focus on their publications, on what they're on the research they're producing and putting into print. And I think desperately need a broader lens when we look at whom we're recruiting to graduate school in the first place, and then whom we pull into the ranks of the professoriate, and then whom we tenure and promote. And here I go back to the very first thing I said, there are people doing such fantastic work, whether it's community engaged scholarship, whether it's the production of oral histories, curating visual catalogs online, producing multimodal work where text is accompanied by audio or video, people producing projects that affect community life, that take immense amounts of time and immense amounts of expertise, of scholarly expertise, advanced scholarly knowledge. But it's awfully difficult for all those things to get recognized in the way they should at each stage in the academic career. So the reward system, the reward structure needs a rethink and needs expanding, and that ties right back to the first point. If we do this, we'll be able to welcome new perspectives, diverse perspectives, and keep the whole system of humanistic knowledge production alive and ticking.
So let me pick you up on, you talked about doing various convenings and workshops, and this is your job from what I know perfectly well is not your office at ACLS. I can tell you're not there. You can try to decide whether I'm really in Charleston or not, and it kind of doesn't make a difference. With the dematerialization, the delocalization of discourse, the traditional ivory tower, the place from which you withdraw from the world, to which you withdraw from the world to go there to have the special rarefied form of discourse. The ivory tower is now a place to leave your coat and your computer while you're doing something else. How do you, and if you could be concrete, that would help. How do you deal with doing convenings, workshops, without it being NYU campus, Tuesday afternoon, 2:00, you must be there or you are not a participant? How are some of the ways we get beyond that? Social media offer the chance of getting beyond your location, but you rightly point to the toxicities that brings.
We've found through the pandemic, and I am acutely aware of the tactlessness and offense I might cause if I sound like I'm talking about the silver lining to a global disaster. So with all respect to the immense suffering and pain that the pandemic has caused and is continuing to cause, it has opened up for us through the use of Zoom, through the ability to convene people from all over the world on the same screen, just amazing opportunities. One of the biggest challenges, I think, and picking up on what I said a second ago about all the people working creatively to make their disciplines and their departments stronger and better, to explore new research, new reward structures, the whole shebang. One of the disadvantages of the number of people doing this work and doing it so well is that higher education, being as fragmented and competitive as it is, institution by institution, there's not a lot of connectivity among all those people. And in fact, I've had many a conversation over the last couple of years where I have heard someone, a dean or a chair at a particular university in, say, the Midwest, describe to me this initiative that they spent months designing, thinking through, and field testing with their colleagues, that they then had to pitch hard to their dean or provost. And the initiative, the thing that they're describing, I've just heard described the day before by a different faculty member at a different university with exactly the same story of months of work and then months of advocacy going into, in some cases, meaningful, but still, incremental, fairly small scale local change. So that, again, the good news is great people, bad news is hard to connect them, hard to get information flowing. And we found that, speaking concretely in two initiatives in particular at ACLS, from which we received funding very generously from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and from the Henry Luce Foundation, we were able to pull together groups of people whom we knew from our own consultations and from ongoing conversations with them would learn immense amounts from each other and be able to share and collaborate and make life concretely easier for themselves, because they wouldn't have to have weeks or months of debate and conversation with their dean or provost. They could walk in the first meeting and say, the initiative I'm about to put in front of you that involves, say, changing requirements for the PhD across the humanities has already been put in place or is being put in place now at the following 6 universities. So there's every reason for us to do this too. The chances of a dean or provost saying, great, let's do it, after that single conversation are much higher than if a person has to go in and fight the battle, A to Z from 0 miles an hour. So we've found in the Zoom box convenings for our loose funded design workshop for a new academy, just great spin-off benefits, pretty much apart from anything we're doing with the groups themselves and the conversations we're trying to instill, the relationships that we're enabling through that workshop that comprises teams from 6 different schools across the country. That has proved to be its own great benefit. I'll mention one other angle of concrete angle of the Zoom convening that we've learned a lot from. In the Mellon funded initiative, the second of the two I wanted to mention, this is called the Intention Foundry. It's run by my wonderful colleague, Senior Program Officer for Higher Education Initiatives, Javon Bickerstaff. And Javon, in bringing to life this project, and I'll explain what it is in a second, she began with the core and started from the core value, and she grounded everything the Intention Foundry is doing in this core value of egalitarian dialogue that's driven by those voices that we tend to consult last in traditional academic practice. So having said that, I'll now describe what this initiative is. The Intention Foundry brings together academic society leaders, executive directors of learned societies that are the constituent members of ACLS, the American Historical Association, the Modern Language Association, the Association for Asian Studies, Music, College Art Association, the whole range of the humanities and interpretive social sciences. The executive directors and other leaders of those programs come together in the Intention Foundry with scholars in their discipline who are virtually all scholars of color, many of them recent PhDs or finishing up their dissertation, so emerging scholars, people who have very clear ideas about how to change and accelerate change in the academy to make the academic scene more welcoming and supportive for them and for everyone else, frankly. So what Jovan did in the Intention Foundry was to start with those scholars. So rather than start with the people we know well and we see all the time, these executive directors who have a lot of experience, and saying, what do you think your society could do to help scholars of color, emerging scholars in an increasingly difficult job market for the humanities and social sciences? And then asking the scholars, what do you think about their answer? She flipped it and she started with the scholars and said, design with me moonshots, ideas for rapid, meaningful change in your discipline in partnership with the society. And then she designed this series of Zoom meetings where the scholars presented their moonshots, had a dialogue with their society director in the field, in the society to which they belong. And then she opened up the conversation across fields, across societies. And the effect was really marvelous because it kept, through the 4 days of quite intensive and often very emotional. I mean, people really were invested in these conversations. They were amazing. Throughout these days, we never left really the frame that the scholars had created for us. They were the ones to set the terms of debate, and there was something about that flat screen of Zoom boxes, where. And with Jovan's leadership and mediation, that was crucial too, that sustained one of the most kind of equal and mutually supportive exchanges of ideas and plans I've ever seen. And I don't think it would have happened in person the same way. There would have been other advantages for in-person meetings. People would have gotten to know each other better over dinner, meeting in the hallways. But in terms of the substance of the conversation, I really found the Zoom convening amazingly effective.
Well, so you're making me think that in traditional space, it would have been easier for you to get the executive directors who were used to going to ACLS meetings to come together in a space, maybe to come to their annual meeting and spend an extra half day doing this, and harder to get a bunch of scholars who've heard of ACLS, maybe they've had a grant, but they're kind of busy and whatnot. It would have just been harder to get them to be the leads on something if you had to have them all buy plane tickets to New York and all that follows from that. Well, this is a lot of fun. I want to end this with a fantasy exercise for you. So you've been at ACLS for 3 years now, or
Right.
3.5, something like that. Yeah. Sorry, you're in your third year. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go forwards, whatever it would be then, 17 and a half years. You've been president of ACLS for 20 years. You've been incredibly successful. And not only have you been incredibly successful, but the world is actually a better place. So we're having the party to celebrate this tenure. I want to say, how did you do it? But not just so much how did you do it, how did we do it? If we're going to be in a better place 20 years from now, in other words, what are some of the things that happened in that 20 years that were critical in bringing us to a place where we talk about, remember the tough old days of the early 20s, but by golly, some stuff has worked. It's a little bit like, imagine you were in 1965 in a university talking about the changes that had come over institutions after depression and war and time like that. But what steps do you think you would have taken for us to have that party?
That's a great question. I can't resist sticking with my colleague Jovan Bickerstaff's moonshot phrasing. That's what she called these ideas that would change the fields where our scholars are located. I would love to hold that party on Mars, on a Mars colony, and have humanists on Mars. And I don't want to sound like Elon Musk here, but what I really mean by that, I mean, I actually would love to have humans living on Mars in 20 years, in 17 and a half years. It'd be great. And I want humanists to be there, historians and anthropologists and people studying art, and people who actually get human culture, analyzing and recording what's happening on that colony. I would love to see that happen. So if there's any funder out there who's interested in bringing humanists to the red planet, call me. But in all seriousness, the moonshot, concept for me would be, it would be such an incredible step for people caught up in the Rube Goldberg machine of higher education to have the opportunity to, within their disciplines or in their universities, but not just in their little departments or even their big departments, but in a bigger context, in their school, in their society, in their learned society, in their discipline, to come together to agree on a common project and a common goal. And I would like that common goal to be lifting the profile of the humanities and interpretive social sciences, not to go backwards to some mythical golden age where studying Latin and Greek and history and philosophy, gave you the keys to some kind of kingdom, however one would define that. But to come together to think afresh about what we're engaged in our disciplines. What are our goals? Where are we trying to advance? And how are we going to make that legible to students and engage students, make it meaningful for them where they are? That, in a way, I'm saying the moonshot should be for all humanistic disciplines and for all universities. How can humanists and social scientists connect with the upcoming generation where they are, meet their concerns, and really engage with them in making the meaningfulness of understanding human culture, human creativity, all the things that go into the humanities and social sciences, to make that knowledge important to them, making it something they value. So that means, because change takes time, and as I've said this before, I've written this before, I don't just mean change takes a long time to happen. I mean, it literally takes time out of our lives. So it would mean a redistribution of how faculty and humanists and social scientists who are now working outside the academy in a whole variety of different jobs like me, it means spending our time differently. We would have to spend less time doing the kinds of publications and the kinds of conventional teaching we do, and more time working together collectively with students. They have to be part of the conversation, collectively with people in the members of the public outside off campus. They have to be part of the conversation to think about what will it take to make the study of our disciplines meaningful and important to the upcoming generation. So if we could organize pieces of some learned societies, some critical mass of schools to organize their faculty and students to get together to think about that moonshot question, that would get us, that would take us a few steps forward.
And maybe call Matt Damon, see if he's got enough resources to support that landing on Mars. Okay, we'll have the party on Mars. Deal. We're good for that. And it will have come about from making opportunity real on a scale that, for my analogy of the 50s, the opportunity that came with building dozens of new campuses was one that people could step up to, we're going to say now, relatively easily. But we've got to recreate that sense of possibility and make it new for another generation. So, well, listen, this has been great and stimulating and exciting. I knew from before we began that your energy and optimism are hallmarks of your contribution. And as someone who's been involved with ACLS, I'm proud and pleased to see you there, and think it's exciting, all the opportunities that you will seize for us. So thank you again for coming to Charleston. You were our first live on stage keynote presenter post-pandemic, and we're very welcome and very successful for that. We'll be back with Charleston Conference next year with more excitement, and maybe we'll get you back sometime to tell us how things are going. Joy, thank you. Have a great day. Thank you, all of you who listen to this, and do have a look around for the other remarkable presentations that folks have made through the Charleston Conference. Always an exciting event and a great opportunity to visit a favorite city. So, Joy, thank you. Thank you all, and have a good day.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for having me.